We're joined by Brad Spielberger from PFF to take a look back at the value the Bengals got in free agency this year and look ahead to the future with Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, and T. Higgins.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. Today, we're joined by Pro Football Focus's Brad Spielberger at PFF_Brad on Twitter. Thanks for listening to the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, free and available everywhere you get your podcast. Thanks for hitting that subscribe button, that follow button if you're on YouTube or on an audio platform, making sure we're delivered to your eyes and ears first thing every day. And Brad, welcome to the show. Gave you a lot of credit in the free agency period for getting a lot of these contracts dead on. And after Lyle Collins was released, I remember I DM'd you and I'm like, Brad, is it possible to do a projection for Collins in this situation where he gets cut and everything's kind of weird? You don't have the chance to get a feel for his market at the combine, etc. When you saw the number initially reported at 30 million, now we've seen it further reported on Over the Cap at 21 million. What were your first impressions, starting with the Bengals' potentially most impactful signing of the free agency period at 21 million over 3 years with very little in the way of guarantees for Lyle Collins?
Yeah, well, first off, I do appreciate you did shout out the PFF contracts a bunch, so that was much appreciated. Yeah, I mean it's a great deal. Like you said, we talked about it even at 330, which is what was remaining on his Cowboys contract. So if they hypothetically sent a day 3 pick to get him, they would have inherited a 3-year, $30 million contract. So to be patient, to wait that out, even though probably a couple teams were in the mix there, and then not only is it 3 years, 21 million, but there's a lot of that compensation tied to per game roster bonuses, which for folks that don't know is basically if you're on the active roster on game days, you then get another chunk of money. And so, if he misses time, he's been suspended in the past and, things like that, they protect themselves. So it is a good deal and a good structure on top of that.
As far as his deal versus the other deals they made with these other, let's just stick with the offensive line because the Bengals have never spent at guard. It seems like Clint Bowling, I think, was their biggest contract they had given to a guard. They go out and get Alex Cappa. They get Ted Karras. What did you think about those deals and the value they got? And how does that stack up or compare to the Collins contract?
Yeah, I think both good deals as well. I was a touch higher on Alex Cappa, so I think it's a fair contract. I know he's not a world beater. Comes from a small school, has gotten better each year in Tampa. I thought last year he showed kind of a better ability against strong, kind of bull rushing interior defensive linemen. Just has gotten his anchor down a bit better. And I think he's a good fit in the offense as well. He's athletic in space. Again, maybe not like the most athletic guy, but I think he can work in this wide zone system. And then Karras is a good deal, but I will also say it's a great deal for the player. But the thing there is his versatility is so valuable. And I think the reason he finally cashed in when he's had some good seasons in the past, starting at center, playing 1,000 snaps and, grading pretty well. And also just in public, being perceived pretty well. But to play almost a full season at left guard last year for the Patriots, to still play very well, shows that he can kind of be moved around where you need to put him. So a good deal for both parties for that one.
When you compare the Terran Armstead deal, which we can all acknowledge was a bargain price for a guy as good as Terran Armstead when he's on the field. He's also missed a lot of time over the course of his career, is on the wrong side of 30, a few years older than Lyle Collins, a couple years, I should say, older than Lyle Collins. I DM'd you as soon as the 3 years, 21 million became known to us and asked, how does this stack up to the Terran Armstead signing? Because I think that was one that got an elite grade from the PFF free agency grader. And so 2 questions here. One, was it you doing the grades? And 2, how does that stack up? Is that close at all? Because I think to Bengals fans who are expecting Collins to come in and be potentially a top, 7, top 5 right tackle in the NFL for $7 million a year, I know it's still the 10th highest contract at right tackle, but what, I guess third question, what is it with the NFL and not paying right tackles?
Yeah, so it was me and a couple other folks. I'll shout out Ben Lindsey is another one guy who was doing a ton of those, probably more than anyone. Those grades as deals came in. I mean, the thing with the Teron Armstead deal is, yes, he's missed some time here and there, but I mean, he is a blue chip left tackle, one of the better players at the position, and it's just so rare for those guys to reach the market at all. I think with Collins, it's more of, I mean, look, he got cut after a good season, for a reason. There's probably some question marks there. He has missed time for not just injury, but again, also suspension and things like that. So, look, both are elite contracts. If we were grading cap casualty, deals, that one would have gotten an elite grade as well. I promise. No matter who was putting in the grade, I would have made sure it got an elite. But I just think with Armstead, it's like I said, it's just you're going to overpay in free agency. That's the nature of unrestricted free agency. And I'm just surprised that deal came in. I mean, folks around the league, I talked to multiple people at teams and agencies. Like, oh yeah, he'll get 20 million a year, not 25. But just he'll get his 20. He'll go on with that, whatever. So for them to get 15 per year on a 5-year deal is just a slam dunk.
As far as, and you mentioned it, free agency, you have to overpay. In the Bengals, they were able to keep one of their key guys in BJ Hill. How did that stack up? Because I know once Larry Ogunjobi agreed to terms with the Bears, everybody, that was rooting for the Bengals got a little nervous at what BJ Hill could make. And they got him at that 3 years, 30 million, 15 in the first year. What did you think about that contract?
Yeah, it's a good deal. Again, it's a touch above where I had it, but if it's within a small range, it's kind of the same to me. I think I had him getting 8.5 or 8.75 per year. Look, it's definitely a great deal. I mean, he goes from getting traded for, Billy Price, who I don't need to expand on, on a Bengals podcast, and I thought that trade was fascinating because he was the guy who actually came with the 7th round pick attached to him, not the other way. I think part of that is just because your draft status never leaves you. And BJ Hill was, I think, a mid to late 3rd round pick versus obviously the 1st rounder and Billy Price. But for him to go from kind of being perceived as that, and look, the Giants have if you want to name one position group they're great at, it's the interior of the defensive line. So they had a lot of guys, and he was the odd man out. But to turn that into a 3-year, $30 million deal is a great deal for him. But again, you're not breaking the bank. He is still, DJ Reader is the dude in that unit, is still compensated as such. I think it's a fine deal and a great way to show, the club, like, come in here, work hard and be productive, and you'll get rewarded.
My last question about the Bengals' early free agency activity is Jessie Bates ends up on the franchise tag at this point, seeing what his agent has done elsewhere. And we'll talk about that impact and the impact it might have on Joe Burrow's future contract. What do you think is the holdup from your perspective, knowing what you know about the way the Bengals do contracts, knowing what you know about the agent? It seems like at this point, what was previously something that we all assumed would get done, covering the Bengals and Jessie Bates and that contract extension, looks like he might play on the franchise tag this year. He might play on the franchise tag next year if they want to keep him an extra year. Is it simply guarantees?
Yeah, so this is a great point. So, you're obviously alluding to David Mulugeta, who, for folks who don't know, basically reps every high-paid safety in the NFL. Like, I've written about this before. There's not an agent that has that much control over a position market where literally every top player is his guy. And so I do think that's part of it. That's part of the equation. But I think the bigger thing is, and this goes back to last offseason, but I think Cincinnati had a window to get a deal done. They kind of, waited around a little bit. And then the Jamal Adams contract came through. And yes, his deal is inflated because he was traded for 2 first-round picks. So all that extra leverage boosts the value. But he changes the entire marketplace at the position regardless. And so I think Cincy probably tried to go back to them. And they said, look, we're in a new market now. Like, the offer that was on the table before is no longer an offer we're even considering because the environment has changed. And so now I think where they're at is, I actually thought there was a very interesting and accurate article from Pro Football Talk. Basically, we'll get into the structure of Bengals contracts a bit, but 2 franchise tags for Jessie Bates is about what a guaranteed amount would be if he signed a multi-year deal elsewhere. That's kind of what the guarantees would be. So the argument is he probably should just play on 2 franchise tags unless they are willing to go against their precedent and guarantee him more money. So I think maybe there's a possibility it gets done. Maybe they find a way to come back to the table and figure it out, and Jessie Bates gets his payday. But it's going to be a hard bargain. I mean, they're not going to settle. They're not going to take a discount deal. I think he likes Cincy, but the whole hometown discount and all that stuff, I think, is more a fan reality than an actual, player contract reality.
Speaking of discounts, will Joe Burrow take a hometown discount? We'll dive into that. T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, their future in Cincinnati next. But first, I have to tell you about Built Bars, the number one protein bar on the planet, high in protein, low in sugar, low in calories, perfect for you. So whether you're like Brad and you're breaking down NFL contracts or you're just sitting at home watching the Locked On Bengals podcast on YouTube, Built Bar is the bar you need to get. It's going to help you whether you need a midday protein punch, maybe it's a protein punch after your workout. So check them out right now at built.com. Use promo code LOCK15. You're going to get 15% off your order. Again, for 15% off the number one protein bar on the planet, go to built.com and use promo code LOCK15.
Let's talk about the future for the Bengals. The future for the Bengals will include an extension for Joe Burrow and contracts that will come due for T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, both of whom look like they're going to be very high-quality wide receivers in the NFL, if not, in the case of Jamar Chase specifically, the best receiver in the NFL if things go a certain way. You look around the NFL, and Deshawn Watson has signed a fully guaranteed contract for the first time in the history of the league with the highest guarantees on a contract in the history of the league at $230 million. You look at the wide receiver market, and Tyreek Hill has signed a $30 million per year deal. I guess it's up to 30 perhaps. I might be slightly wrong there, but Devante Adams, $28 million, DeAndre Hopkins, $27 million, and then a big fall off to DJ Moore at $20.5 million or so. That sounds like a lot of money for the Bengals to lock up in 3 players. Do you think that with the way we're expecting the salary cap to continue growing, do you think these trends are going to hold true for the next couple of years?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy when you lay it out. It's going to be close to, if not more than $100 million per year for 3 players. If they do elect to, extend all those guys. I would say we'll start with the quarterback. So the structure there is a league-changing structure to go a full 5 years of full guarantees. Kirk Cousins obviously was kind of infamous for getting that fully guaranteed 3-year deal. And Watson pushes it, to a different stratosphere, about $150 million more than Kirk Cousins' contract as well. So, I think the Bengals are going to be able to shift back towards the Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen structure, which is basically 2 years before a particular season, the money will become guaranteed. It was called rolling guarantees. So, for example, for Burrow, like his 2026 money would become guaranteed in 2024, and I think they'll approach it that way. But I'm sure him and his agent were happy to see that Watson deal come through, and they're looking to sign a massive player favorable contract. It's hard not to let that impact you. I mean, the guy is in your division. And without, going down a rabbit hole, he did that with all those things going around him, whereas Joe Burrow seems like a model citizen and just a guy that everyone is rooting for. So, yes, those trends are definitely continuing, if not going to, expand. As for wide receiver, definitely some funny money in those deals, which is good news for the Bengals. The Tyreek Hill deals for about $25 million per year, and the Devonte Adams deals for about $23 million per year. So it's not as crazy of a change as we expected them to make. Devonte Adams, it sounded like he wanted to actually sign a deal for $28+ million per year. He kind of didn't. Still, though, I mean, Jamar Chase could sign a legitimate contract for $30 million per year in 2 off seasons, which sounds crazy, but I mean, it's within the realm of possibilities.
Yeah, it's scary when you put it like that, I think, to a lot of people that are thinking about this trio staying together. But let's focus a little more on Burrow, Brad, because if I'm Joe Burrow, and you kind of hit on it a little bit, but if I see Deshaun Watson, a guy who I think I'm better than anyway, and I'm 3-1 in the playoffs with behind a bad offensive line, and I got this team to a Super Bowl and all of these things, why wouldn't he just ask for, instead of rolling guarantees, why wouldn't he just say, nope, I want a fully guaranteed contract?
Yeah, I mean, he can, and he probably will, or, at least we'll broach the subject, or we'll say, if you're not going to give me that, then what are you going to give me, as a concession instead of that? And so what's interesting here is, without trying to, have a whole, requiem on Mike Brown, but genuinely, The issue for a lot of owners with this contract, and Mike Brown is at the top of this list, is that you have to put fully guaranteed money in future years into escrow. I'm sure you guys have seen this now. Everyone's talking about it now. But basically, before this Deshaun Watson contract, it would probably be the Aaron Rodgers deal, where there's $100 million fully guaranteed. So that means that the Packers had to put aside 75% of that, away. For Deshaun Watson, that's $157.5 million. Once you run through the whole, it's insane. And so that is completely unprecedented. And I do not think all 32 NFL owners simply cannot do that. So if Burrow asked for it, Brown would be like, look, I can't afford to pay keep the lights on in my house. If you want me to do that, I don't have the liquidity to make that happen. So that I guess is the counter to Burrow asking for that.
I had a bit of a light bulb moment when I learned about the escrow rule, which was before the new CBA, probably 3 years ago. I was like, oh, they just don't have money. They just don't have cash. Like, they can afford to pay the players when the shared revenue comes out and the TV revenue comes and the ticket revenue starts coming in, and they can pay their weekly checks and they can hit all their expenses. But when it comes to big guarantees, well, they're either acting like they're cash poor or they are cash poor compared to other NFL franchises. I think that will be very, very interesting to see, because the topic of the extension with Joe Burrow comes up next year. And historically, when you look at the Bengals, the last 5 years or so, they're spending cash up to the cap or over the cap for the most part, which is pretty typical. This year, you look at it, they're at about $178 million in cash spend so far, well below the unadjusted $208 million salary cap. I keep telling our listeners, well, I expect they're going to spend more of that money. The rookies obviously make up some of this. Practice squad makes up some of this. Offseason workouts make up some of it. But even adjusting for all those things, they're coming in way below prior years. From your perspective, knowing how they do business, is this something that you think is earmarked for an extension? Do you think that they're, and with minimum spending rules in place, I know those are averaged over multiple years, is there more spending to be expected for the team this year? Or could this be the beginning of like, okay, we got to squirrel away 20 million here, 20 million there to put into escrow for this Burrow extension that's coming?
I think you nailed it. No, I think it's the latter. I'm sure they're not going to not make moves. If a guy comes available random, but like if Stephon Gilmore wants to come to Cincinnati, they're not going to be like, well, we're trying to save up some cash for Joe Burrow next offseason. But in a general sense, I do. And I think that's not just the Bengals. I think the Patriots, they spent like crazy last offseason in free agency, have now done nothing in free agency. And I think it's because, ignoring the cap, just from a cash flow perspective, the owners try to stagger these things. And, the Bengals will give the big signing bonuses, but then obviously, not have guaranteed money in terms of salary or roster bonuses and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think it is a multifaceted approach where the team is budgeting several years out, as they should be. And I think they do a good job for the most part.
Two things.
Did you see Steve Bisciotti's comments today about Deshaun Watson's contract? The Ravens owner, like, I'm not sure he should have been the first guy to do it, but this is going to make it hard on a lot of teams. And it's
100%.
Some 4D chess there from the Browns, perhaps, like, oh, we don't want Joe Burrow signing an extension in Cincinnati. Let's just fully guarantee this contract because we can. Sorry, James, go ahead.
Oh yeah. Two things. One, and I know you weren't saying this, Brad, but I want our listeners to make sure you're not reporting that the Bengals are interested in Stephon Gilmore, correct?
No. I wish I could break that on the pod.
Well, there's so much Gilmore smoke in Bengeldom right now. On
Bengals Facebook.
Oh my God. Yeah. Nowhere legit, but it's like, Gilmore, man. Second thing, what about this? Because Jamar Chase has played 1 year. He's the 5th overall pick. He's under contract for 3 more years, team control for 4 more years. Couldn't they just spread it out a bit and just wait on the Chase deal, do Higgins next offseason in Burrow, and then do Chase, say, maybe after that 4th year when the 5th year option is up? Like, is there a benefit to doing it that way versus the moment we can extend Chase, we're going to extend him after 3 seasons? How would you view that? Because I'm sure there's some strategy and they're going to have to figure out a way to piece it together if they are going to keep the trio together.
100%. Yeah. So the interesting thing is that T. Higgins really is the first guy that, based on the standard timeline, is probably the first one that's up for a new deal, because he's not a first-round pick, so he'll be extension eligible after next season. But unlike a Joe Burrow, as you mentioned with the 5th year option, his final year of control will be in that 4th season. Obviously, they're probably going to want to get the quarterback done as early as possible. And the argument there, of course, is just the market's always going to go up at quarterback, so you might as well do it. Then again, obviously, two teams in the division did not do that in Baker Mayfield and Lamar Jackson. They probably feel smart for not doing that. But yeah, I mean, I think you do teams definitely look at it that way. Say, can we stagger these things? Can we spread it out? So there's a 2-year gap between these massive contracts. I think if you're Jamar Chase, you definitely want it after the 3rd year. But look, you mentioned DJ Moore at the top of the show. He just played in his 4th season, now gets the extension before the 5th-year option. Mike Williams just played on the 5th-year option. Like, you definitely can go that route with Jamar Chase. I mean, I guess the same argument could be made of, well, the market's going to keep growing, but that's not really an issue with Jamar Chase. I mean, he's going to be, we already know as after 1 year, it's going to be top of market. So how much worse could it get?
Could get much worse, I think, because the cap is continuing to grow. I keep waiting for the $300 million cap in a couple of years here, because just extrapolating from the new TV deal, it's going to get there. It's just a matter of when, if they try to gradually build up. Coming up next, we'll talk about the way the Bengals structure their deals and continue that conversation as we look ahead to some of these contracts and reflect on how the Bengals try to stay competitive and build a dynastic roster around Joe Burrow. And we'll get Brad's opinion on some of those matters to finish the show.
But first, a word from rockauto.com. There's nothing worse than having unreliable transportation, other than maybe having an unreliable offensive line. And that's why you need to get to rockauto.com, because you're going to save money on the same car parts that you're going to get from car dealers, the same parts that you're going to get from the big box stores for less. You're going to get those same quality parts, whether you drive a Honda, Toyota, Mercedes-Benz like Jake, it doesn't matter. You're going to be able to find the parts you're looking for. And why spend 30, 50, even 100% more when you can save money right now and shop from the comfort of your own home at rockauto.com. They're a family business. They've been in business for more than 2 decades, and you should check them out right now at rockauto.com to see all the parts available for your car or truck. And be sure to write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box so they know we sent you? Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com.
Brad, before we talk about team building strategies and cap management strategies, let's talk about the Bengals' current cap space. It's somewhere around $18 million or so. I don't know if that includes the Stanley Morgan deal or not. My own tracking, which accounts for rookie deals and the practice squad and all these things that I think the Bengals also account for, suggests that they're closer to around $11 million in effective cap space at this point. Should we expect some more cap spend from the Bengals this year from their history, in your opinion, or are they going to roll all that over?
I think they'll probably make maybe 1 or 2 other moves, small moves, maybe like a depth cornerback addition or something like that. But I do think they're going to want to carry over. So again, this is more of a cap than a cash thing, but they're going to want to carry over as much as possible because of the way they structured things, where a lot of the money hits the first year. You're going to want as much cap space as possible in 2023.
All right, let's dive into dynasty building. A lot of fans of the Cincinnati Bengals are wondering, why aren't they just restructuring Trey Hendrickson so they can sign Stephon Gilmore? Why not just get that extra guy and show that, they're really going for it? Meanwhile, there's another school of thought that is, well, they just signed 3 starting caliber offensive linemen for the price of 1.5. If you look at some of the top of market guys, maybe 1.25 if you look at the top of market guys. And they brought in some role players and Eli Apple and Hayden Hurst, and they retained BJ Hill and their top priority in Jesse Bates. And maybe the way they do things without relying on year-to-year restructures and whatnot is better for the long term. Maybe going all in is actually bad. And it's not like we have a ton of examples of long-term dynasties in NFL history. They're mostly limited to Tom Brady's Patriots. But from your perspective, Brad, is there something that's inherently better or worse? And maybe that's where we start before we talk about advantages and disadvantages to both approaches.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, as long as you have a consistent approach to how you manage the salary cap, I think you can get away with whatever method you want to. But this is a conversation we have every single offseason with the New Orleans Saints, where can they do enough to become cap compliant? Yes, they're always, of course, otherwise they wouldn't do it. But but can they create so much room they can, be active in free agency and, do what they want to do and take care of all their guys and keep a guy like a Trey Hendrickson? Like, maybe not. I'm not suggesting they wanted to and couldn't keep him, but there comes a time where if you're continually kicking the can down the road and always pushing your obligations into the future, it might bite you. And it did happen to the Saints when they went 7-9 3 years in a row in the middle of Drew Brees' kind of his prime, because they were doing the same cap shenanigans back in the day. And it kind of caught up to him. Jairus Byrd was counting like $10 million against their cap when he wasn't on the team, like 2014. That's probably, those numbers are all probably wrong. But like, there's all these kind of, so if you're consistent and patient and don't do that, you don't have the potential downside risk of a bunch of bloated contracts on players that are not that good anymore. Or maybe you don't feel like you can cut a guy because there's too much dead cap associated with that cut, and you might as well keep him, and then he's not good, and all these things and so on and so forth. So long answer short, you can do whatever you want, but the way the Bengals do it, it presents future potential risks down the road.
And what because everything that comes up, or what usually comes up, is the guaranteed money and all of those things. And your talks around the league, because here's what the Bengals would say. I know it. It hasn't prevented us from getting Trey Hendrickson. It hasn't prevented us from getting, Alex Cappa. We were able to get the deal done for La'el Collins. So how do you think the league, how do you think agents in general view the idea of the Bengals when the Bengals call, knowing that, yeah, they're not going to guarantee half of that deal. And, you might have this big prize free agent, but they're in the market of how they structure contracts. Do you think that hurts them, impacts them, or how do you think the league views it?
So it impacts structure. And again, this happens, I guess maybe talk about this pre-show, but the Packers and Steelers deal with the same issue. So it's not just Bengal specific, but what it does is those agents and players are going to need cash sooner. They want earlier cash flows, because if you're not going to guarantee later money, then they need to get, be compensated that in some way. So, Hendrickson, a perfect example. He has the roster bonuses in each of the first 2 years of his deal for $6 million. That is because he's not getting guarantees in his second year salary or something like that. So instead of getting paid throughout the year on a non-guaranteed big salary, he's like, I want $6 million in cash on some date in March before, I'm off on a beach in Cabo and I'm getting a nice chunk of cash, because that is my, how I reconcile with the risk of you not guaranteeing my deal. And so that's how it impacts it, is the way the money is paid, the way the structure plays out. They need more upfront money. Because, if you're the Saints, it's like, oh, well, if you're going to guarantee money in the, the third year or whatever, then I don't care if I have a minimum salary the first couple of years or whatever, because I know I'm getting that money at some point. With Cincinnati, there's no guarantee, literally. And so that's why the structure is impacted the way it is.
And it used to be that the Bengals would say, well, we don't cut guys. But this is maybe the most dead cap money they've had from cut players in my memory, with $5 million of those roughly $10 million in dead cap hits from Trey Wayne's deal, cutting him in the last year of his contract. And one thing I've been critical of is, instead of doing that year one roster bonus, which they like to do to front load the cap hit, just prorate it, because the cap is going up. Just put it in the signing bonus, and then you can fit in one more free agent every year. And it's not going to catch up to you that hard, because $6 million prorated over 4 years is only another, $1.5 million of dead cap hit if they do have to cut him in the future, maybe $3 million if things go really south. So that is one criticism that I think I still have of the way the team does business. But if you're running the Bengals, knowing or approximating perhaps the cash flow issues that they may or may not have, with the club being their primary to sole source of income, how would you go about doing things for the next couple of years to try to build the most competitive and long-lasting team around Joe Burrow as you could?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I'm not even sure if it's a cash flow issue with the Glazers in Tampa Bay. I mean, they own like Manchester United and a bunch of other things, so I don't think that's an issue for them. But they were actually the biggest. They didn't even put signing bonuses in contracts. There was literally zero proration, if possible, for them on their books. And so what it enabled them to do is they've now pivoted to the extreme of the opposite degree And because they were so patient and paid year to year and never pushed money down the line, they're now eating up all that future year cap space that was available to them because they never dipped into those waters. So if I'm Cincinnati and things continue to go how they're going, let's say again next year before you pay Burrow, they're a playoff contender, make a run in the playoffs. You have to be willing to do a little bit of that, like you're talking about. Maybe shifting some first year roster bonus into signing bonus, or maybe restructuring a couple contracts for guys that you do want to keep, guys that you're saying, again, you trust will be there. It's not drastic. It's like you said, maybe an extra $3 million if a deal goes south. In that particular example, they're going to have to be willing to explore that at least to a small degree. Otherwise, then you could probably make the argument like that they're maybe, they're not wasting a window, but they're not maximizing a window.
How big do you think those windows are in the NFL? Because to me, it's people keep thinking, "Oh, be Tom Brady," right? Yeah, they're a year or two. They're a year here and there. They're cyclical. They're a roller coaster. So I think I'm on the same page with you there. But if you get lucky and you find this generation's Tom Brady, who Joe Burrow, no doubt, models a lot of his approach to the game, if not play style, because there are obviously differences there after. Well, then maybe you can do things. Look at the Patriots' history for some clues. Brad, really appreciate the time and insight into some of the cap and cash matters facing the Bengals, or recently having faced the Bengals. And do you have any work that we should know about coming soon over at PFF?
Always something coming out. I guess it's draft season now, so I'm taking a back seat. But I do appreciate you shouting out the free agency stuff a lot. We put a lot of work into those. So still free agents left to be signed. So if you Bengals fans want to check out who else is out there, we continuously update the 100 best remaining free agents. So check that out.
Awesome stuff from Brad. And if you followed along in our free agency spreadsheet, all of the contract estimates came from this man. And they're a big part of our offseason exercise in terms of doing our free agency simulations and that sort of thing on the show. So we're glad we've had the opportunity to have the guy behind the numbers on this show. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. We're back as always tomorrow with more Bengals offseason content as the march to the draft continues. Until then, Bengals fans, hoo day and have a good one.